Welcome, everybody. Let's start with just some quick introductions. Could you say who you are, what you do at Carbon 5?
Sure, I'll start off. My name is Christian Nelson. I'm a partner at Carbon 5. I'm also the head of technology or head of development. I've been at Carbon 5 for almost 11 years, so I've been there for quite a while. In my role, I'm still a hands-on developer. I do a lot of coaching and mentoring of our own internal teams, but also of our clients. And I think one thing that I'm particularly interested in as a consultancy, forming new teams all the time. I like thinking about how we can get new groups of people to work really well together. Because every time you have a new team, it's like a clean slate. So that's maybe it's a little masochistic in that way. I like going through that process over and over again.
And I'm David Hendee. I'm the director of design. I'm sort of Christian's counterpart on the design side. I've been there at Carbon 5 for 12 years and worked at a consulting firm for way too long. But I think, like Christian, I have sort of a angle on design that's more about emergent design. I think our practice is really optimized for figuring out the product design in flight after it's exposed to users and market forces. And I think we're really, as an organization, passionate about adapting designs to the overall fitness and fit for purpose of design. So.
Great. Could you tell us more about Carbon 5, the business model, what you do for teams?
Sure.
Oh, me? Oh,
sure.
Shit. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so Carbon 5 is a consulting firm, so we do work for hire contracts. We do typically time and materials work. We basically work with clients. They come to us. They say, we are going through a growth spurt. We either don't have staff to do a project or don't have the know-how to do using some technology, or don't feel like we need help with design. And we'll help them frame what an engagement would look like. How could we execute your goals within a certain amount of time, and then field a team. But we always work towards an end where they're fully staffed with their own team. So often we're helping people hire and train up people, or if someone's offloaded a work stream to us, like a project, just because they don't have in-house time, because it's some back office thing that's high value, low urgency, we'll transition, we'll have somebody on board from the client team a month or two before the end of the project. So it's basically consulting. It's like a bootstrapped company, a lifestyle business that is because we use agile methodology, it's very sustainable pace, but it's always very product minded and helping teams deliver products.
Yeah, and I think I'm kind of curious, let's get a round of hands. Who's a developer here? So some developers, who's designer? Some design, and how about product management? A little bit, okay, so it's a good mix, great. We've been around for 16 years, so we've been around for a while, and we're a mere 75 people. So in Silicon Valley terms, we've grown about as slowly as humanly possible and still be a tech company, and that's deliberate. And as far as what we do for teams, we're not like a stuffy consultancy that does formal training and has PowerPoints to teach people. Everything that we do, every client we work with, every team we work with, it's all through close collaboration. Our client teams are often working directly with our folks, or we're working directly with them in their office, depending. So it's all hands-on, learn by doing. That's basically our style of teaching.
Great. What are the challenges that people come to you with most of the time, or some bigger challenges?
It's a mix. We'll probably talk about a couple of things. We work with clients that are publicly traded, massive companies, and we work with founders. It's one person who's raised friends and family money. They don't have design or development. So the spectrum of what we cover is pretty vast, and the challenges are quite different.
Right.
I think almost every project, I think one common thread across all those clients is there's a limited amount of time and budget, and there's always more stuff to get done than there is time to do it. Whether a company is worth billions or not, that's still the case on some level. So I think one of the biggest challenges we help clients solve is to figure out what is important. And that often means getting out of the building to figure out what prospective clients or customers might want if they don't have any customers. If there are already stakeholders or customers, then we'll meet with them and try to learn as much as we can so that we can basically sift through all the possibilities of things that could happen and find a small set that makes sense, that is actually valuable and useful, and can get done pretty quickly. I think that is one common thread. You wanna-
Yeah, it's like Richard said, it's like a variety of companies. The later stage companies, like we're working for both the Gap and Stitch Fix right now, and it's like they're both in fashion. They're both trying to we're both on the supply chain logistics side of like trying to make more efficient delivery of like clothes people want onto their bodies, you know. And but they're different stages, and the Gap is like really wants to just deliver software more efficiently. So you'd think of it as agile coaching, but we never do agile coaching. It's always like in the form of a project, in form of like delivering software, because we think that's the healthiest way to talk about that. And with Stitch Fix, it's like they have everything dialed. It's almost like, for us, it's almost staff augmentation, because everything is like high functioning, and every feature they deliver, everyone loves. So it's a wide gamut on those, like what people are getting out of it, velocity versus like tell us how to work more like a startup.
How does continuous integration fit into that picture, specifically around, the individual developer with family money versus a Fortune 500 company?
Yeah.
Do you introduce that methodology to all your clients, or do you pick and choose?
Yeah, we've been fans of continuous integration. Who remembers cruise control? Does anyone remember cruise control? Okay, see August, maybe a couple other people. We were like early users of cruise control 13, 14, 15 years ago. So CI has always been a part of our basically development bootstrap for every project. Thankfully, it's gotten quite a bit easier. It's gone through several significant iterations. And now, basically, whenever we kick off a project, within the first day, usually within the first 2 hours, we have a GitHub repo, we have CircleCI, almost always in place, and then we're pushing to some hosting environment, often Heroku, but not always. Could be AWS, could be something else. And that's basically one of the first things we do, day one. For us, I think it's so ingrained within the culture of Carbon 5 that in the few situations where we've been in a tricky situation where we can't set up CI, our teams are actually they're lost. They're like, wait a second, how can I keep working if I can't see my work get automatically deployed, continuously deployed to some environment? I'm being a little bit silly about that, but it is quite natural for us. Yeah.
What kind of challenges do you see when you introduce CI to various companies? Do you feel like there's any kind of pushback or confusion, especially I guess at the handoff phase? So once you've completed that project and you've given them the tools they need to continue working, do you see customers continue to use these tools, or do they fall back into kind of bad practices?
They use the tools. They just comment all the tests. It's fine. It all passed.
Yeah, we have. We've worked with enough projects that there's an example of everything. I think that many clients, the reason why they work with us is they're excited about the methodology, the philosophy of how we work. We're like a fairly straight up XP style, extreme programming style agile shop. So if a client isn't interested in working that way, then we usually end up, they fall off in the sales funnel. But that isn't to say sometimes clients they have really good discipline and they have really good practices when they're working with us, and sometimes things fall off. I think CI usually sticks though. We've had maybe there's been a couple cases where someone who is responsible for kind of DevOpsy kind of infrastructure might prefer a different tool, or they have their favorite thing. So the conversation usually isn't about should we or should we not be doing CI. It might be which tool do we use. And we're big fans of do something that's easy, that you don't have to maintain, because there's so much. Anything that we could do to have more time to answer the question what is the right product to build, and to have more time building product, if there's a choice between one option or another, we're almost always gonna favor that. So something like CircleCI is a natural fit for that. Heroku and some of the other hosting services are a better fit for that than spinning up a bunch of machines, bare metal machines on rack space and doing all your ops yourself, which we do that sometimes too. But
how many of your customers would you say are even familiar with these concepts of CI and CD?
It's changed a lot over the years. When we started doing, like I said, we've been around for 16 years, and we kind of adopted XP style Agile 13 years ago, 14 years ago. And at that point, it was definitely there's a big conversation around kind of all of the XP processes, our practices. CI, writing tests. Occasionally we do work with teams that don't see the same value in testing. If you don't see the same value in testing, then CI is also less interesting. You could just be deploying code that is untested, I suppose, but you lose at least some of the, that seems particularly dangerous.
Sure.
Automatically deploy things, but with no safety net.
Yeah.
I think a good portion of our customers are like, they don't even know what that means, but we try to bake it in so early that they don't really care. It's just like another service. So for us, if they're like a non-technical founder, they just know, oh, I check the acceptance server for my features. And so they don't really understand all the piping that goes into that process. And then I think that the hardest thing is like a later stage company. I'm thinking like Theo, or like people that have a lot of code. August worked on that. A lot of code and no CI, and maybe it's like a native app, and they're like, well, we're just playing fast and loose with a lot of integrations. And then when they onboard us, the ultimate client is like bought into like, oh, testing, that sounds great. Like high quality software, that sounds great. And then when the line engineers like meet the reality of like, well, we have to pay down some debt on the infrastructure side, and that might take it's hard. It takes more time when there's zero code to implement than there is some friction, and people quit on the sometimes.
Yeah, totally. So when I think about CI and a lot of the customers that we have, it's always about like the back-end stuff, the databases, their APIs. A lot of people don't think of CI and design together. Could you speak more about how design fits into your process, specifically around continuous delivery or continuous integration?
Yeah, I think for me it was sort of transformational because we didn't have design. We started, we're just developers, and we did Agile, and then I had a design background, but it wasn't until we could figure out a way to overlap the design work so closely with the delivery of value to customers, even if it's like in a private beta or user testing, that things started to unlock around like, instead of like designers making a spec and begging engineers to develop it, it's more like a collaborative process of like, let's weigh the bang versus buck of each feature and create a flow where it's like just-in-time design, and we're able to test that thing really close to when we deliver it. And I think continuous delivery is a big part of it, because the conversation can go from like, look at my sketch file, to like, look at the acceptance server. And there's a lot of pain that comes with that. Like we'll see stuff get delivered to acceptance with like really crappy content, or like, not, the design is not tight enough. But I think those are the good conversations to have, because like sometimes you make a trade-off. It's like, well, we didn't tighten it up. We thought it was better to put something in front of the stakeholders early. And I feel like that's the healthy thing, instead of like, let's just design it up front and ship it. And then on the CI side, I don't know if they're like, we don't really live in the world of pixel perfection.
Right.
We do have some experience. We were talking in-house, like we've never done the like, let's compare pixels, but people in-house are like, yeah, we've done it, mostly for like regret, like knowing that a change we made should affect the UI versus like, I didn't expect that to make a change, is really helpful safety net on the like visual diff side.
Right. Yeah, I was going to speak to that. Like, we do have some clients that I've worked with that are like taking screenshots of every possible situation and like diffing them against the last one. That sounds amazing, but it also sounds like it's a pretty big investment in tooling and getting that to actually work properly and not have any false alarms. So if you give some advice to people, like should you invest in pixel perfect acceptance testing, or is it better to like go find like the really important levers and focus on those?
Yeah, we're working with Autodesk, and they're working on like a UI, like a component library. So it kind of makes sense why visual perfection might be a thing on people's minds. But and we're using, I don't know the technology that was, like Gemini is like some gem we're using, and then there's like React Storybooks in integration that will like save out states kind of automatically for you. But they're not like uploading a target file from a designer. They're more using it for like, did this commit change stuff? And then, so it's creating an ecosystem where you could do pixel perfect stuff, but nobody in the like in the chain of like definition to delivery is really thinking like, I'm gonna put my ping file up there and like, you're gonna make it look like that, which I think that's the thing I would think was a bad smell, is like that expectation.
I think your question is a really good one, because I think at the very core of everything we do, and not just as developers or technical folks, probably in life, is there's a balancing act. There's like the investment versus the value, And for this particular client, it's a UI widget that's going to be used across many products. That value proposition is quite different than if you're a startup and let's say you have 10 users and you're just trying to figure out what features stick. Those are two extremes, and then some projects may be kind of in the middle. But I think that that inherent balancing act between value and investment is something that affects everything we do, whether you're designing, doing product work, or you're a developer. I feel like it's one of the areas that teams, like any team, can probably learn a lot and improve on that in lots of ways. It's one of the things that we sometimes see is that balancing act is kind of out of whack. Someone spends 3 weeks, for example, not that I've ever seen this really, someone spends 3 weeks building a custom email delivery system when they don't have any users yet, when they could have just used SendMail or something like that. You're like, I don't know if that was the right 3 weeks, the right time to spend those 3 weeks. So I think that's core.
Great.
Every problem boils down to a people problem, and you're like, if we're using technology to intermediate between your people problem and some person you don't like, then it's like probably a bad scene, and you maybe just should quit.
Exactly, yeah.
So it sounds like you've onboarded more people to CircleCI than I have, which motivates me. What advice would you give people who are new to CI, given your extensive experience with both huge projects and small projects and very specific scope? Not specifically new to CircleCI, but just new to this whole idea.
There's a few things I think that are super critical. Fix broken builds. If the build is broken, someone needs to stop what they're doing, or it has to be like a responsibility of the team. Someone needs to step up, get a green build. Because once those red builds start piling up, people stop caring about CI. They lose faith or confidence in CI, and at that point, it's essentially useless. And part of that is as eventually your project is big enough and you have some intermittent failures. I think that spending time trying to control those, tracking them down is a good idea. The first time I heard of Jenkins plugins that will automatically rerun your test suite, if you have failing tests, or rerun just the failing tests, and not consider it a failure unless it does it 3 times in a row. The first time I heard that, I was mind blown. I kind of get it on a big project, but I would do my best to try to avoid getting in that situation.
Right.
And then I think the similar to having tests you can trust, having a test suite that runs pretty quickly.
I think at EasyRes, we walked into there, and their test suite took more than 24 hours to run, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
It was and that was a lot of decomposing their system architecture and changing the way things work. So it's not a simple switch to turn. If you have they have decent test coverage, but it was no one ran it, or they only ran it on a big build of production.
Yeah. So I feel like the better the visibility into how a test suite performs and why things fail, the easier it is for teams to react to it. And a lot of it's creating a culture of hey, the test failed. We got to fix that. That's more important than anything else. And that can take time for some teams.
Great. Yeah, totally. I think that the trust is a big factor. I think after some time you get alert fatigue, similar to if you're a nurse in a hospital and you hear the same alarms going off. You start ignoring them, and bad things will happen. I guess the stakes aren't as high in software. But
it's the same for if you're using New Relic or you're using Honey Badger or whatever. If an exception comes in, either prevent that. If it's not for real, then make sure it doesn't happen next time. And if it is for real, resolve it. So I think that's an important trait of a healthy team.
Great.
Yeah.
That's all the questions I had.
Yeah. You did really good through the whole stack.
I did. But we have some time for some audience questions. So please.
We encourage pair programming. We're not dogmatic about it. We don't require everyone pair program all the time. But the way that we describe it is everyone pairs, but not necessarily all the time. And we really leave it to teams to figure out what the right level of pairing is. Some teams will pair all the time. Teams that don't pair all the time might pair 25% of the time. And we have some rules of thumb. If you're doing a hairy refactor, grab a pair so someone else understands why you're doing it. If you're introducing a new library or framework, grab a pair, or maybe even the whole team to kind of discuss it to make sure everyone understands why that thing's being brought in there. Sometimes you're just staring at the screen for 2 minutes, and you're like, I don't even know what I'm doing right now, or I don't know how to tackle this bug. That's an automatic cue to grab a pair, just to talk through the rubber duck, as they say, talk through your problem. When it comes to, I think, this almost sounds like a cop-out, but we're really good through our sales process, we're really good at describing how we work, and that testing and occasional pairing when we feel like it is the most valuable, it's just part of the Carbon 5 product. So, and what's funny is we're often in a position to defend those things quite a bit more strongly than in-house development teams, because they're afraid, or their boss is saying, don't do it. But we can say, well, you hired us, and this is the thing we do. We don't really bend on those. But we try to be respectful of our clients' time and money. And there are times like, what might happen is we might grab a story, a pair will start working on it, and at some point they get to that point where like it's pretty straightforward. There's some back-end work, there's some front-end work. Two people will sit at the same desk, and they might spend half an hour and like basically split and then join back up in half an hour and kind of see where they landed. So we try to be efficient that way. But
Kind of a weird, I think we're living in sort of a post-agile world in a weird way, where people are, like, there's highly functioning teams that are operating in a like, they may like sprint and harden, they might not do TDD, or they may like have a culture of like of asynchronous like remote work and occasional pairing. And it's kind of like, we try not to be dogmatic, because it could sound like we're 20 years out of date if we're like, we're XP Agile. It's a little weird environment. I think the last couple of years, I felt like you have to be like, instead of like I grabbed a pair, you're like, I asked for some help from Christian, or like we worked together on this thing because we're importing a new library, like, and some testing where the teams will be like, I threw in some tests, and everyone on the team was like, I'm excited you increased our test coverage, but if you asked permission, you wouldn't get it. You'd be like, I want to test drive all features. Like, oh, that's either because somebody had a bad experience with Agile, or because the team is sort of thinks they're post-Agile, but they don't have a language for the practices they really value. So I think it's an interesting time where we don't quite have the language for the values that we're all sort of striving for in terms of quality and
I feel like we kind of didn't answer your question. I feel like we talked a lot about pairing. I'm going to say one more thing about it. So if a client suggests that we don't pair, what we'll say is we pair when we feel like you're going to get the most value out of pairing. Because if we don't pair now, some other communication is going to have to happen later that we wouldn't need to do if we pair. And if there isn't clear enough communication amongst all the team members, the team they fall off being on the same page. And then that in itself will cost more time and money down the road, often when it can be more expensive.
The bus factor or onboarding juniors. So it's like we have so many arguments, but like it all comes down to like, I really think we should do this, like in my experience. Yeah, most of our clients come, I say, with a strong solution hypothesis. So they actually have an opinion about features they want to deliver to market, and we tend to engage them instead of saying like, well, your idea for a solution is not fit for those people, or you don't understand those people, which is often the case. We usually work with them with their vision and think features first, but as a design team know like that everyone's going to learn through the act of delivery, and keep an open mind. So like, even if we go like, well, that sounds like a great idea, what's the smallest version of that idea we could put in front of a group of 10 people or 2 people or 1 person? So people come to us with development in mind because they know we can deliver, because we're a bunch of talented engineers. I think the designers, we have to know like that our goal is to like design the finished product, not to design in a vacuum. We're not like ivory tower designers, but it's a struggle, because we do like we want to be design led, and we think design is really, really important. But I think we kind of like work with a developer centric culture and a feature. And I think if we all think of us as product oriented people, we're all product designers, we're all product developers, even if we're not engineers, then it creates a healthy like conversation between like PM, design, and dev. But people come to us thinking, build my features, and that is a conversation.
We introduced our design practice 7 years ago, so we went quite a while being engineering only, though we were very product-minded engineers. I think that over the years, we've just learned how to talk about design in a way that even if a client didn't come in thinking they needed it, we'll often start off with a designer. They may roll off after a month or two, especially if the client hires. But we've found it's a pretty important role to have from the get-go, even when clients aren't necessarily looking for it specifically. It unlocks the rest of the team, just like product management unlocks the rest of the team. The whole team is able to move more quickly if they have all the skills necessary to get the job done, rather than like, this would be great, but we're just going to use Bootstrap because we don't have a designer, you know. Yeah, this is an interesting topic. I think and the reason why I say it's interesting is I think it's very much a function of how well a team communicates. We have, in general, find that the best kind of code review is real-time code review while you're pairing, and it's actually because we're humans, and what happens when you're in a real-time conversation with someone talking about a thing that you're doing is quite different than after someone has invested a bunch of time and then they get feedback about the thing that they've done. In two ways, a bunch of time has been invested, and it can be frustrating to find that you worked on something for 3 days and you took you made some decision that someone else isn't happy with. And I don't know why this is, but for some reason when people type words instead of speak them,
they're a-holes.
They can be jerks, or not actually be, but they can sound like it. So I think those are two challenges with doing anything other than code review through pairing. Now, having said that, we do pull requests on many projects, and what we will do, what we'll often do, we kind of have it depends on the team, but we usually have a sort of informal process of you build a feature, create a PR, that will spin up a review app so that people can look at it, including a product owner or product manager. And then we will either specifically ask someone to look at our code, or we'll drop a note in Slack and basically say, hey, I just wrapped up this feature, it would be great to get some eyes on it. And I think one thing that we will usually do a little bit differently is when someone does have feedback, if it's just minor, we'll just drop a note. But if the feedback feels a little bit meatier, the two people will get together and have that in-person conversation rather than just bike shed over PR comments. But it's honestly it's a mix, and some of our clients feel quite strongly about one way or the other. Our goal is to not let those code reviews delay a feature for very long. So it's we're very proactive about asking for feedback. And if someone doesn't respond in an hour, we're like, hey, it would be really great to get eyes on this. So, or find someone else to give some feedback on it. So
I was kind of curious about Circle because you have remote developers, and I have a few teams that they're not remote developers, but they're creating this. They're from ex-GitHubbers, and they say this culture of. So they're like, it's fine if you pair, but please don't have conversations verbally. Put them in Slack. And so it's really trippy for the team, and it was very hard for the first 2 weeks where you're sitting next to, and they're like, okay, I kind of get it, even though they're not that far away or they could be in the same office. And it's and the same thing in the PRs where there was a lot of friction around, not the little things, but the big or I thought we had already settled that debate 2 years ago and my way is clearly better, and talking about abstraction or libraries or things, and those are really hard to do not in person and over the text-based code review structure.
Yeah, I think we struggle with it just like many teams do, especially if you have a distributed team or a remote team. And it's very true that if you have a PR that's more than 1,000 lines changed, it's just fine. Everything's great. Go ahead and merge it. And then when you have a PR with 5 lines and a button is changing, and there's a 6-week-long conversation about that. So
somehow every line is wrong.
So it's tough. It's really tough. It's a tough problem. I think it has to be your team needs to decide what you want to do. And CI, even CI cannot help you if you don't merge, because then you won't run your tests. So I don't know. It's tough. It's very tough. We talk about completely just destroying code review sometimes and just shipping it and YOLOing, and then on other days we're really sad and want to have great feedback. So it's tough. Again, I completely agree that via text it's really hard. Most of our engineering team today is remote, all over the world. So not only do we have asynchronous communication, text-based communication, it's across multiple different time zones. So not only is the text negative, you also had to wait 6 hours to get it. So there's a lot of frustration sometimes in some of the PRs.
And we've seen a lot of clients where we're doing a React or like where you might have 6 or 7 developers all working on a very small footprint, and then developers, like we may like a really small story size or feature size, and other developers may poach a story or like grab a big chunk, and then you
cluster of stories.
and then but then they're really people getting better at like incrementally committing, and like how do you have those like conversations across threads, and like where you're touching a lot of code, or like you sort of chase it, whack-a-mole around like patterns and things.
I think one thing that works really well is feature flagging. I'm gonna give a shout out to Launch Darkly, but like you should just ship it and put it behind a flag, and if it's awful, turn it off. Like that's the best thing to do in my opinion, because for a lot of these things that are sitting around in code review for too long, like they're not that big of a deal most of the time. So if you just let some customers tell you what they think, that's gonna be more valuable than like somebody that's up at 4 a.m. Who decided to go do some code review that day.
Yeah, I think that if that's paired with a culture of like periodic paying down tech debt, it's almost like a conscious decision to be like, we're going to occasionally incur tech debt, but we're going to occasionally pay it down with a Slack day or some, there's different ways you could handle it. I think that can work pretty well.
Yeah, but I think definitely as your team grows, it gets harder and harder and harder to get on the same page and like have features being shipped. So it's a great question.
Good question.
It's definitely not Slack.
Yeah, I feel like, Dave mentioned a little bit before, like it's a typical part of building a product for a client is the transition to their team. And I think that we basically, with only the rarest exception, we will not work with the client unless there will be notable overlap between our team and at least someone on their team. So that there can be the natural knowledge transfer that happens by pairing on things, working on features together.
And especially making a bad decision together. Because I think if you can like have some time and make a mistake and then know why you made that mistake, because we were hitting a time, or like we just effed up, and then you like live through that together. You're like, I get why this code is the way it is, because there were like a lot of priorities that we're trying to balance.
There are pressures. No one has the opportunity to write perfect code. So every line, there's a history behind every line, and there's some compromise that was made. And we find that if we just not just we, but I think if any one team hands code to another team without enough overlap, then the new team doesn't know why those decisions were made. And the consultants will be vilified or get rewritten. There's always some gnarly thing that happens there. Something that we learned early on in our business is, if a client isn't planning on hiring a team, we try to convince them why they need it, because software is never actually done. It's not like you do it, you launch it, and then money just rolls in. And then, awesome, but, so we convince them they need a team. And if they're like, no, we don't want to do that, or if they say they're going to do it after they work with us, it's kind of a disqualifier for us. Even if we could do the work really well, what will be remembered of Carbon 5 isn't going to be as favorable, because whoever they hire after we've done their work, they're going to want to redo some stuff.
Besides pairing, which I think is everyone thinks is promiscuous pairing is probably the best way to have shared code ownership, but another metric we sort of think about is how quickly a new developer gets onboarded and can commit code, which is sort of like a thing you try to pay down that debt.
We try not to do weird things, to be honest. Every project, like whenever we're working on something, we get to do solve interesting problems and use some interesting tech, but we're not trying to make every problem kind of come with a completely unique solution to every problem. We try to, if you're going from one project to the next, the way that you build it and run its tests and the things that it might need and where those things are documented, all those things are consistent. And it's one of the benefits, one of the interesting things about being a consulting company is we probably deliver 30 products a year across all of our teams. So we're starting new things all the time, and we're always trying to improve how we could do that. And we try to eliminate the unnecessary differences between things and try to keep things really, really simple. So I think that helps, at least amongst our own teams, but it actually kind of helps when you transfer to external teams.
I think another thing we see is challenging is where if the teams are split, like we're the API team, or the services team, and then we're the mobile team, and we're the web team, and if developers can't quickly, even if it's not just them, like do go through the whole vertical slice, it depends on what stage you're at, because if you're like, things are working great and that's how we work, that's fine, but a lot of teams are like, we're stuck, like we can't innovate, or we can't ship features fast enough, and you're like, well, it takes your API team 2 weeks to do a thing. And so that ownership is not just code ownership, it's like institutionalized into like departments. And often those decisions, I remember we worked with Share Through, and Rob Fan there was the CTO, and he would experiment with his team. He would like, yeah, let's try that for like 6 weeks or 6 months, and then let's switch it up and like have cross-functional teams. Or I think if like you get stuck in one team architecture that maps to your code architecture, or your like divisions like geographically located, then you're like, you can get really stuck in ownership. It's all chatbots. It's like Alexa and VR. You know, Alexa has like a new thing where it's like Alexa, but it has a screen that you can touch, Alexa Show. Then they're gonna have a keyboard, and then it's gonna be all back to just like a computer. It's gonna be fun. New technologies like what?
Yeah.
Everything.
Specifically in developer land,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
languages, or say a client comes to you and says, I want to build this in Haskell, and
Yeah.
no one on your team say knows Haskell.
Yeah.
Oh, but they want to learn it though. Be
Yeah.
psyched.
I think that our developers, for example, are pretty aware of what's happening in the greater development community, just by the nature of who we are and the kinds of people we hire. They're generally curious about what's happening. For example, even if we're not doing machine learning on any client projects, we at one point or another will have a group of people doing it over lunch or something, taking some Coursera class. So we already have naturally curious people. So kind of knowing what's on the radar isn't as much of a problem as finding time to figure out if it's something we really want to use. I'd say that what will typically happen is Elixir is a good example. Elixir is something that has been on our radar for the last 18 months. And over the last 18 months, we've worked on 3 paying client projects to do Elixir work. And I'd say that we didn't just like start selling Elixir work. We're like, this seems pretty cool. We've been following it for a while. It felt like Elixir had kind of reached escape velocity. I didn't think it was just going to immediately fall back down to the earth and disintegrate in the atmosphere or anything like that. So it felt reasonable. And then we have a bunch of internal projects that we use to run our business. So we're like, let's rebuild one of those in Elixir and Phoenix. So at that point, we had confidence in it that we could sell it to a client. So that's a pretty natural path for new technology to come in. And part of your question was when a client is asking for something specific, we're really, really honest with their clients, and we'll say, let's say it's Haskell. We'll be like, we've got 2 people who know a little bit of Haskell because they were curious and they wrote a little something or other. We will have a collaborative conversation about the pros and cons of using whatever tech stack or whatever tech stacks are out there. And then sometimes clients are like, I really want to use it, and I really want to work with you. And then we just figure out how to make the value proposition work. And we've done that with a few clients with technology stacks that we don't regularly use.
We had a client that really wanted to use Golang, and it was really, we were like honest, like we don't know anything about that, and it's probably going to be like a 30% hit on productivity. And they were like, well, I think I could find some really good developers who want to try this, and I could recruit easier. And so we were like, we'll do a spike, and like that's actually hard to argue against. Like that's, like you'd be the only people like you could do production Golang at that time, and so we did it, and we're like, I think everyone was heads up, and it was slow, and it was like painful, and no one really wants to do it again. But maybe now, maybe it's been 18 months, maybe awesome.
Yeah, so I think we, as consultants though, or really as I think anyone in any position, there's like chasing the shiny thing. And there's that versus having a real conversation about the trade-offs of using whatever that is. And you don't want to ignore all the things that are new. Some of those things are actually pretty awesome, and they might actually be the next big thing for your organization. At the same time, we're trying to build products. We're trying to make businesses be successful, and experimenting with the latest technology every single time is not necessarily going to be the thing that gets that.
This would be a pretty good time for us to promote our new JavaScript framework. If you guys have a minute, we could.
Yeah, it's
Sorry,
Yeah.
too soon.
Yeah.
Too soon.
Thank you very much.